So today's session, what feeling lies within discovering mood and tone. And I'm pretty sure you're very familiar with these two concepts. Okay? But then, let's admit it, there are times when teachers or even, well, most likely learners, they get confused. They tend to mix up these two concepts. So the challenge for this session is to have a solid understanding, and let's see which strategies can we use in teaching tone and mood. So here are the session goals. First is to recognize the differences between the two and how tone and mood contribute to the overall impact of the story. Then let's see the different strategies. But again, disclaimer, I'm not imposing that these are the only strategies that we can use. Definitely, we have a lot of strategies that we can use in teaching tone and mood. But let's just focus on some. And hopefully at the end of this session, we can formulate questions when we discuss and assess tone and mood. Let's begin with what tone is. Remember what, how, and why. So basically, when you say tone, it refers to the emotional quality of the text. Okay, so I'm using an analogy, like a speech. Just like right now, I'm the speaker, the audience. In writing, you have the author and the reader. Now, when you hear the speaker's voice, it can convey a wide range of feelings, right? So can writer's voice. Although, in reality, it is easier to detect verbal tone than written tone. Let me give you an example. Common misunderstanding of couple or friends happens between text message, right? So you send a text message, and then, for example, my partner, he would think I was scolding him. But then when I explain it to him verbally, he would understand that I wasn't scolding. I was just explaining my side. So verbal tone is easier to understand compared to written tone. That's why when we study tone, we must examine the context. We must make an inference. Now, the common definition of tone is that it is the author's attitude towards what? The event, the plot, the audience, the subject, or the character. Now, let's have an example. Imagine you are reading a story, okay? And then the author described this place. What can you say about the place? So, one of the lines in the story says like this: "This place may be shabby, but since both of my children were born while we live here, it has a special place in my heart." So what do you think is the attitude of the author when he wrote this line? Sentimental, thank you very much, right? Because of the phrase, "a special place in my heart." Even though it looks shabby, cluttered, messy, but then it expresses tender and gentle emotion, okay? But let's say same description, same setting, same story, but one of the lines goes like this: "If only there were some decent jobs out there, I wouldn't be reduced to living in this miserable dump." So what is the tone? Why bitter? Because the character or the narrator resents the situation that he's into, that forces him to live in such a miserable dump. What about this one? Same setting, same description. "This is the apartment we live in. It provides shelter." But I guess the closest answer would be objective. Your answers are possible if we will examine the whole story, of course. Because I don't see any trace of emotion here, and it is very straightforward, right? Very factual. This is the apartment I live in. It provides shelter. That's it. Okay? So now, we know what tone is, but then the question of the learners, "Teacher, how can we detect the tone? Where's the tone in the story? Because we cannot hear that the characters are actually talking to us." Okay? So we have to teach them how is tone conveyed in literature. Okay? And of course, based on the example, you see 3 pictures. So there's a possibility that we encounter positive, negative, and neutral tone. But most of the time, it's positive and negative tone. So what makes up a tone? Of course, we have to understand the point of view. which is one of the elements in a short story. Diction, author's word choice. Level of formality, so we look into the character's relationship, the dynamics. Let's say, what is the tone between your superior and the subordinate? What's the tone? Authoritative, okay? Very formal, very serious. But then, between friends and lovers, what's the tone? Casual, very open, okay? So we look at the level of formality, the dynamics of the relationship. Of course, dialogue. Actually, this is the source in which we can really understand, examine the tone of the text, and syntax, which is the arrangement of words. Now, all of these, as a teacher, I must check first. Do my learners have prior knowledge on these concepts? Why? It will be difficult for our students to understand the tone if they don't know these concepts. So I would say these are considered prerequisite knowledge. So before discussing tone, let's check, let's see, let's assess. Do our students understand what point of view is, what's a diction, etc.? Okay? Now, next question. Teacher, why do you have to understand the tone? What is it for? Right? Why can't I just go straight to the story, what, who, when, where, and the message, that's it? But then why is there a tone in the story? So the first, can you guess? Let's see, visual learners. What's the use of tone in the story? It bridges the gap. Okay, that's right. So close to that, reader's connection. It deepens reader's connection. For example, a story that is light on tone markers, or let's say mix-up, there's a tendency that the readers will get confused. So we should be clear in articulating the tone. Next, what about this one? Can you guess what's the use of tone? You see different facial expressions of the same person? Okay. Character development. Tone can change over the course of the story. And this is very evident as the character starts to grow or change, particularly the dynamic or the round characters, when events start to shake up, like during the rising action or probably the climax, okay? So we understand character development through tone also. Next, this is a wordle of a woman. It says attentive, affectionate, determined, all adjectives about a woman. Can you guess? It's related to character also. Traits. Thank you, sir. So through tone, it can reveal character's personality. Okay? And of course, just like in comics, it will give us some cue on the different scenes in the story because we see the changes, the plot development, as we examine the tone. What did you notice about the tone? It changes, right? But the same character, okay, as the story progresses. So there's this concept of tone shift and split tone. Good authors rarely use only one tone in their writings. Complex attitudes might include a changing attitude, just like what happened to the owner of Paningning, or tone shift, or one attitude toward the reader and another attitude toward the subject, split tone. Okay? So now let's move on to the next concept. This time, it's about the mood. If tone is the author's attitude, mood is the general atmosphere, the ambience. What's the vibe that you get? Just like the moment you step here in this place, what's the ambience? What's the atmosphere? Do you like this place? Yes, okay. Okay. Do you like your office? Yes, right? Okay, positive mood, right? Okay. So in story, when you say mood, it refers to the prevailing feeling or frame of mind that is usually developed at the beginning of the story. This is evident in the setting of the story, which creates somehow a sense of expectation of what is about to happen. Okay, so let me show you an example, but this one in a viewing context. You're familiar with the movie Frozen? Let it go, let it go. Okay, so what's the mood of Frozen? What's the feeling that you get after watching the movie? What's the vibe? Happy, right? Okay, excited. But let me show you an edited version of Frozen.
You'll be fine, Elsa. The gloves will help. Conceal it.
No.
Elsa, this is getting out of hand.
She's ice cold.
She can learn to control it, I'm sure. Till then, lock the gate.
What have you done?
It was an accident.
Where do I get the reward for news of the Queen?
Okay, just tell me one thing. What was happening on the North Mountain? Did it seem magical?
Yes.
Take me up the North Mountain.
Elsa!
Anna, you have to go. No, I'm not leaving without. Stop touching me!
Anna, your life is in danger. There is ice in your heart put there by your sister.
All that's left now is to kill Elsa and bring back Summer.
When are you going to lighten up and have a heart?
Scene. So you can compare and contrast the original trailer from the edited trailer. And you see that the difference in the sound, the lighting, and even the angle or the perspective where you show the story, it creates a different impact. Just like in mood. Maybe what you are reading, you feel this way, but another person might feel a different feeling about the text. Because again, coming from different background, right? So now, same question, just like tone, how is mood conveyed? First, we can understand the mood through the setting, okay? It is the where and the when of the story takes place, right? Because setting is usually the start of the story, and it creates the mood. Like for example, if you hear the phrase, on a dark, stormy night, what's the mood? Gloomy, probably potentially threatening. But if you see, ominous, thank you ma'am. But if you see, or if you read the word, once upon a time in a cotton candy kingdom. Cotton candy. Yummy. Whimsical, lighthearted. Okay? So setting is important when we teach the mood. This one, diction. Okay? A word in literal sense may mean the same, but it can evoke different connotations. Like for example, let's use a basic word, rain. Rain is a form of precipitation. That's the literal sense. But then rain for you could remind of sad memory, sadness. But rain for you could remind something, happy memories, positive, blessing. Okay, so diction, connotation is also important when we discuss the mood. And imagery, tapping all the senses. Okay? Not all images in the story would reflect the mood, but those images that are repeated can indicate the mood of the story. So for example, the mood is, or the poem has these words like herd of sheep, brooks, what else? Trees. Probably the feeling is like idyllic, relax. But then let's say the mood is lights out, we're sweating. So what's the mood? Okay, possibly you're tired. Or probably let's say candlelight, sweet music, chocolate. What's the mood? Romantic. I like romantic mood. Anyway, so everything, all of these are prerequisite knowledge. Okay? It's harder for students to understand mood if they don't have concept of what setting is, what's connotation, and imagery. Okay? So when do we use or why do we need to understand the mood? Just like in tone, the mood helps the writers to take the readers like us in a journey. And what kind of journey is that? Not just to stimulate our minds, but in an emotional journey. Okay? So that we can be responsive, we can be engaged in the text. So emotional response. Next, mood will help us to understand the several subplots. Okay? The changes. It gives us like a cue from one scene to the next scene. Mood can also help us understand the theme or the universal truth of the story. Like for example, if the theme is about death, tragedy, let's say Hamlet or Macbeth, probably the mood would be, what's the mood? Yes, that's the mood. Mournful, gloomy, okay? And then, understanding mood will also help us sustain engagement, right? If we like the story, if we're hooked in the story, it lets us continue reading. But then if we don't like the mood that is being developed or that we feel about the story, we stop reading. So it helps us sustain our engagement in reading. So I guess we're done with the first part. Now let's move on to the second part. Now let's discuss the strategies. So what strategies are we going to use in teaching tone and mood? In this illustration, I'd like you to see that there's this hierarchy of strategies. The lower order up to the higher order strategies. Okay, and then we'll try to touch a bit of each. So we'll focus on creating images, inferring, and questioning. Okay? Remember, good readers use comprehension strategies in understanding the text. And so we must explicitly teach them these strategies. And when we say explicit teaching, you know this model already. We start from direct instruction, modeling, guided, and independent. Now, I found this, a more complicated, complex diagram of gradual release of responsibility. So as you can see, the diagonal line, teacher's responsibility, gradually releasing it to the learner. But in the middle, there's the shared responsibility. So I am going to focus on three: visualization, making inference, questioning. Okay? In teaching, tone, and mood. But again, I'm not saying that these are the only strategies that can work. Okay? So what do we mean by visualization? The ability to create a mental image representative of the text. That when you read, I can see it in my mind. I can imagine it. And it is a metacognitive reading strategy. Okay? In fact, it is the fifth strategy along with the popular strategies like prediction, questioning, clarification, and summarization. Presley is a famous researcher in comprehension strategies. Okay? Another terms for visualization, sensory imagery. When we ask our learners to visualize, it's easier for them to recall the text. Like for example, if I'm reading a book, let's say 10 chapters, okay, how can I track or monitor my understanding if I won't be able to visualize it? Let's say I'm on the 10th chapter, the last chapter. Do I need to reread the first to 9th chapter? Of course not. So visualization is critical. Okay? We can use this to help us in recalling, remembering the details. It is also called the brain movies or the movie of the mind. It has something to do with brain-based teaching also. You know, athletes, one of the methods of trainers is visualization. Kung sports coach ako, sasabihin ko sa team ko, okay, try to form an image. What do you want to be? A winner. How are you gonna win that? A strong image. Because it works. It's really a powerful tool. So now we can start forming in our mind how to be a billionaire. Okay, so brain movies, like when we read a book, diba? For example, I read Hunger Games. So I was so engrossed in that book. And then when I saw the movie, it's either you are disappointed or you're satisfied. Is the image that I was able to create when I was reading it the same the image that I saw in the movie? But of course, we have to understand there are limitations in movie. And it is also called, in technical term, Gestalt imagery, or in psychology. Gestalt means an organized unit or whole. Okay? So the only way for us to have a Gestalt imagery or a complete picture is through visualization. So we're talking about complete the totality of the picture. We're not just after the bits, the pieces of information, but we want to see the big picture. And there's this line from a Nobel famous scientist. It says, everyone, who can guess who said this famous line? Thank you, sir. Okay. Albert Einstein, the power of imagination. Okay? So it's very important. And one way to do that is through visualization. So how do we do visualization? Of course, very basic. Then let's just recap. Everything starts from reading. Could be read aloud, especially for young learners, could guided, silent, etc. Later, we will do that. And this step, I think this is the step that we miss. We assume that our learners will just automatically visualize, right? But without telling them, okay, class, as we read, try to imagine. What do you see, feel, taste, smell, and hear as we read the words in the story? So we have to verbally tell that to our students, that you have to imagine the story. Or else they will space out, magiging lutang, kung ano-ano nang na-imagine, right? So we have to redirect their attention. But then, do we just stop there? Let's say okay class, we're gonna read the story, try to imagine. Then after that, I'll just proceed with my discussion? No. The next step is that we have to verbalize it. Meaning, give time for your learners to think, to imagine, and then let them express that. We cannot skip that part, okay? So how do they do that? Through words, like discussion with their partner in the class, or, of course, if you have plenty of time, depends on the teacher's decision, you can ask them to sketch or draw. And that's the time that we go for asking questions. That's why I chose this visualization, making inference, questioning, leading to the tone and mood. Okay, we'll see later. Now, making inference, you know this? Recap again. It's based on the idea that reading is a psycholinguistic guessing game. Okay? It is about the interaction of the thought and the language. And because it's a guessing game, we want to read between the lines. There is some information that are not directly stated. So we have to figure out using this formula. Text evidence plus prior knowledge. But then there's a caution. If let's say I will define, okay class, making inference is like this, then probably it remains vague to our students. The word infer, teacher, what is infer? Okay? So we cannot simply tell them to make an inference. Instead, if we can be more specific by naming types of inference, we can easily model. So again, modeling of how to make an inference. Let's have this. I just chose some types in relation to tone and mood. Skilled readers make different types of inference. First, you make inference by looking at the antecedent of the pronoun. And so the teacher should say, look for pronouns and figure out what to connect them. So you understand their characters. Next, making inference is also when we figure out unknown words. So as a teacher, I should tell this to my student. Okay, class, look for unknown words and see if any other words in the sentence or surrounding sentences give you an idea of what those unknown words mean. Another type of making inference is understanding intonation of characters' words. So this is related to tone. Okay? Read this section and see if you can explain why the character acted this way. Next, identifying characters' beliefs, personality, and motivation. So the teacher should tell this directly. You should guide the students that this is how you do this. This is how you make an inference. As you read the section, look for clues that would tell you how the author might feel about the topic. So now we're talking about the tone. And another type of inference is providing details about the setting. Think about the setting. What other details can you add? Why do you say so? Okay. So from visualizing to making inference, let's move now to questioning. So I use this illustration because sometimes when we discuss literature, probably we're just focused on the lower order. I'm not saying that noting details is not good. Of course, that's preliminary, that's basic. But then we have to go higher for that, the higher order thinking skills. So we cannot just spoon feed or throw questions more of the what, who, when, where. Okay? But we want our students to develop inferential understanding. Okay? Because the kind of questions that we ask shape their thinking. Kung nasanay si bata na puro what, who, when, where, then every time they would read, yun na lang yung iisipin nila. When in fact, there are other questions that we can ask to deepen their understanding. So let's just recap the different types of questions that we ask in the classroom. So we have the conversion question, which is a close question. For example, if I'm asking about the mood, what is the emotional effect that the excerpt creates for the readers? Or you have the divergent question, which is an open-ended question. Why do you think the attitude of the old man is like this? Do you remember these two questions? These were part of the pre-test. Okay? And then other types of questions like probing. So you have to recast or reconstruct your questions to further elucidate and get clarification. Reflective questions to consider their thinking. How did you come up with that idea? Why do you say so? So justifying. Verifying is that asking for an evidence and redirecting. So these are some potential sentence starters. So we can give this to our students. So you ask questions and then later on you train them to ask their own question, self-questioning. And so combining these three, it's easier for us to teach tone and mood. Because in the typical classroom, probably we just define, okay class, this is the mood, this is the tone, these are the list of adjectives. What is the tone? What is the mood? That's it. Okay? But then, using visualization, inference, questioning, students will have a solid understanding of what tone and mood are. So let's begin. So what are the possible challenges? One is vocabulary, right? Because there are lots of tone and mood words. So one way is to design activities that will enrich students' vocabulary, one at a time. So again, scaffolding. Applying visualization strategy. Sometimes we assume that students know it already or doing it without telling them. So again, let's be explicit and constant practice so that it will become a habit. And the questions leading to tone and mood, we cannot just stick to what is the tone and mood. There are other ways to discover the tone and mood of the question. So tone and mood are often mixed up, but if tone is the author's attitude, mood is how you are made to feel as readers, and this is what visualization is. Teaching reading strategies together rather than isolation is important because students must learn how to use reading strategies in a flexible, resourceful manner rather than using a strategy simply because they were instructed to do so. So again, thank you very much po.